Good afternoon, Dan.
Good afternoon, Christoph.
How are you?
Very good, very good. So how did you play football this morning?
I played football this morning and I am dearly paying for it. with aches everywhere.
That's good. It's good for you. Today we're going to talk about something which interests me not only socially but also professionally. It is the question of how do we gain knowledge?
Well, when you pose the question like that, actually the traditional way of gaining knowledge used to be experience. You go through life, and as an old man or woman, you know more than as a young man or woman. Experience.
Yes.
And experience was the currency, and that made you heard. Even in industrial innovation research, it has only been in the middle of the 20th century that a systematic shift was made from experience to systematic research methods of gaining knowledge that is transferable. Because the great limitation of experience is it doesn't travel. You know, what worked for me in my career, and then I pontificate to you, this is what you have to do. I don't know what the real reasons were why I may have succeeded, and so it may not apply to you at all. It may be wrong. It may actually even hurt you. But that shift from experience to more systematic ways of gaining knowledge, that's really recent.
You mentioned the magic words, research.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is so important at the moment because the information has been abundantly available since the World Wide Web has been popularized with all the social network. You can get information, opinion, thoughts anytime, anywhere you want. But to get good piece of research, I'm afraid these years it could be a challenge at the moment.
If I may, a very quick answer to this.
Yeah.
The availability of data in the World Wide Web, that doesn't mean that you can gain knowledge, right? Because if that was true, then QAnon, which relied on all kinds of data and then applying conspiracy theories to it in order to conclude that we are the victims of a dark cabal of sinister people in the bad government, just shows you that if you just look at data with crackpot, views, then you get crackpot answers. So just data alone doesn't guarantee any knowledge production at all.
And also I'm thinking how you getting the quality of data, it is important, and how you analyze it. But let's coming back. What do you think, as a university professor, to you, what is research?
Research is a systematic, repeatable method of explaining the world, of finding explanations for how the world works. And I'm stressing systematic and repeatable because human psychology tempts us to lie and cheat and dismiss what we don't want to hear and bias so it makes us look better and be sloppy and forget. And in order to overcome the limitations of human psychology, and not allow the powerful to, only let come up what they want to hear, you need systematic and repeatable methods. And that's what research means.
If I may also, since Aristotle, he talked about repeatable and systematic. But I think also being creative as well. I mean, methodology has evolved. What I want to say is when I started a research degree in Cambridge, I mean, these words, as a young Chinese students coming all the way to Cambridge, I mean, the words like ontology, epistemology, deductive, inductive, constructivism, positivism, interpretativism. My goodness.
Every field has their own little lingo to keep outsiders out and intimidate them. And so research methods have their own jargon, which is designed to intimidate people and keep them out. You don't need to use those fancy words in order to talk about what research is.
But knowing these words are important, right? To be able to socialize within the Cambridge crowd.
You said something that for you, creativity is an essential part of research.
Absolutely.
I disagree in the following sense. I think creativity is not a necessary part of all research. Actually, a lot of research is just diligence, block and tackle and push things forward. A lot of research doesn't require a lot of creativity. You need to know what you're looking for and be diligent. Great research requires creativity, right? Because the creativity to ask questions that nobody has asked before requires creativity. But it's not a part of the definition. Not all research requires creativity. So in that sense, I disagree.
I think if I may, it is not a creativity, it's a creative process, I would think. Because to be able to tackle same question or same problem, you could use different methods.
Yes, that's true. And that requires that you understand methods, right? Now,
yes.
You see, to give you an example, in the 1960s there was this sociology professor who discovered that the IQ, was going up every year, all over the world.
Right.
And he first couldn't believe it, and then he decided, let's go look at it. That was a big creative leap because it was against all traditional wisdom. And it turned out that was replicated all over the world, and then in the mid-90s, then he actually saw, at old age that actually the process started reversing. And so again, so there was a big creative leap. Now the many people who did research on this, collect the data to see is it really true, who do we need to go to, school children. That wasn't very creative. So there was somebody who kicked off a new area, and that was a huge creative leap. But then all the people who did this work, that didn't require that much creativity.
Well, let's just park this. Let's just agree we disagree on something.
We agree, yeah, sure. Also part of science.
Also part of science. I totally agree. What I want to get understanding a bit more from you is from a practitioner's point of view and also academic point of view. I totally see there could be disconnect in between. But before we talk about this conversation, I think it'd be interesting to take people through what is a kind of research process. Taking PhD, you supervise a lot of PhD students. Taking a PhD research project, what kind of research process you will take a typical PhD student through? So first is that to looking for a question.
Well, so part of the PhD is that you actually learn at least a couple of research methods very well, so you can competently execute them. For example, statistical data analysis and collection, or systematic, how do you write a case study and compare multiple case studies so you can actually draw conclusions that point beyond the case studies, or how do you build a mathematical game theoretic model of strategic interactions among many players, which is something that economists would do, or decision scientists. So there is a collection of research methods, and part of the PhD is that you learn how to apply at least a couple of them in a competent way.
Yes.
Okay. And then with that comes, and that's called research methodologies. And then you need to learn about the context, of the fields in which you want to operate, because there is certain conventional wisdom. You need to know what it is, so you know when you are moving outside it and where you can contribute to it. And then ultimately, comes the thing which is in some sense the hardest, which is what's a good research question, right? So what's a good, if you want to use the metaphor of a murder mystery, what's a good murder, that you want to illuminate, where you can then ask the question, who done it? What is a good thing where a good question where if you find the answer, it matters, you know, and you can tell people you know who would benefit from it, and you know, and then you can then design a program in order to actually find the whodunit, you know, the murderer. But you know, coming up with research questions requires experience, and that requires creativity, and that's the hardest, and that's where the brilliant people, the people who are becoming famous, the people who do impact the world, that's where they excel.
So once the question is asked, just the process you just take us through, the next step is actually using what you have learned in terms of methods.
It can go the other way around. You know, you work on something. You know, you are trying to find, you know, why some cultures in companies are more productive than other cultures. And then as you are working on this, all of a sudden it dawns on you that it's actually not the culture, but it's, you know, the influence of the shareholders on the board, you know, that influence how the organization.
But that question will decide what kind of methods you use, whether qualitative or quantitative or what
you may be working on something, and then a new question may arise because you stumble over something that you didn't even foresee.
That's right.
Right? And so the research question, you start with a question, because if you don't have a question, you just randomly gather facts. That's useless. So you start going in a direction, but then you may stumble over something much bigger, you know, which expresses, you know, which identifies that you had made wrong assumptions, that you were, you know, barking up the wrong tree. And sometimes you need to go, I will go in here, actually I need to go there. And that's also something that I would say distinguishes people who have been very, very successful, that they have the insight and the flexibility to do something like that. So the question a question starts, but the real question, the important one, may fall, you know, you may literally stumble over it in the middle of what you're doing.
But a lot of research starts with, when you do this kind of exploration, most studies started with a thing called the literature review. So no, that's again to you, not the way you do. Not all. Okay.
Well, if I want to be cynical, I would say the boring ones start that way.
Okay.
Right, because you say, here's what my predecessors have told us about what is true, and I have identified that there is a little hole in there, and I will now tackle that hole. Well, you know, maybe that is sensationally, you know, surprising, but in most cases that's probably pretty boring. You know, I think the most interesting questions, they fall from you by interacting with people out there in the world, where you go, oh my God, I had never even thought about it. And then you start looking at this, and then at some point you need to check whether somebody else hasn't already found the answer where you thought it was new. And then you may find that somebody has indeed found part of the answer, right? Because nothing is always, you know, ever totally new. So, but you don't start with a literature review and then you go to the holes. You start with something that you know matters, is interesting, and you don't know the answer, and then you check whether somebody else has already found the answer. That's where I think you have a better chance to do something interesting.
That's totally, I think, that totally sorted, I think, most of the first year PhD students, right? I think you're not doing them, their supervisor, a good favor. They will say, oh, we no longer need to do the desk work. We can all go out.
You do need to do the desk work, but it's, you know, you need to do it in the right order. Yes. Get inspired by something that matters, rather than, you know, fill boring, you know, little lacunas, you know, of little details that other people hadn't quite mopped up.
I think the motivation to me, actually, question wasn't the most important thing to me. To keep a long project like PhD research going for years, it is the motivation behind it. You've got to keep the motivation high.
That's the number one thing I say to my students.
I think
work on something that you love, that fascinates you.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise, you're not going to have the stamina and the energy to keep, you know, working on it and do all the hard work.
When I was in the university, it is every week we have a weekly review meeting of everyone's research topic, whether you are a student or you are a very well-known professor. You're sitting in one room, you give a presentation of what you've researched. the feedback, let's say, I mean, most of it obviously criticism. Some of them are a very good criticism, which is constructive, and some of them are quite blunt. But I enjoy the process because that's the process of thinking, and that's also part of research. It is the debate between the researchers.
Yeah, I agree.
So research is so much more than a question, a method. It is also a social interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. All creative processes are.
Exactly. And the fact why I think, on the other hand, why Cambridge is so interesting is when you go back outside your department, going back to your college, you meet people in all subjects.
Yeah.
And that sometimes
it's very valuable.
blows your mind away.
Yeah.
And the way they understanding a phenomenon could be actually applied to yours.
Yeah.
But sometimes I also found in Cambridge there is also a disconnect, let's say, of a personality and what they do. You know, they're top researchers in their field. But when they come into tackling other people's question, they're very narrow in what they want to get to. So
one challenge, which you already alluded to, that I think many academic researchers don't live up to, is that if you're interested in your research, see it as something that actually isn't just a professional activity, but it really applies to your own life as well. You can learn something, to your own life.
Exactly.
But they put their research into a little box, and that's what they do between 9 and 5. And then they go home, and it's forgotten, and they do something completely different, and it doesn't influence their behavior. And if you do that, you have just cut half of the potential impact of your research, because you're not looking at it really in a wide enough context. Tell you a story.
Yeah.
At the school where I was before I came to Cambridge, where I was a professor, I was the associate dean of the PhD program.
Okay.
And I was approached by one of our associate professors who complained about a PhD student and said, this woman is behaving really inappropriately, disrespectful, is disrupting my class, and you need to at least censor her or kick her out of the program.
Wow. That's
that's
big accusation.
Very big accusation, very aggressive, very alarming. So I approached that student and I asked her in my office. She was Chinese. The professor was American, and she was Chinese. And so I asked her, I've heard that there is a bit of tension. What do you say? And she said, well, the topic of that professor isn't the core of what I want to do later. It's a class that I need to take, and I totally accept that I need to widen my horizon. I take the class, and I do what I need to do to pass it. However, it's not my heart, and so I'm doing the minimum in order to pass the class, but no more. And so, I'm sitting a little bit in the back, and maybe he would like me to talk more, but I don't ask me to be enthusiastic about something that I'm not enthusiastic about. And I didn't see anything inappropriate in what she said. So I went back to the professor, and I actually went to his office, to ask him. And in order to break the ice in the conversation, I asked him, tell me a little bit about your research. Oh, and he became very enthusiastic. And he said, I'm working on a fascinating empirical project where I do experiments with human subjects on negotiation.
Right.
And I do this, negotiation in different cultures. And what I find is that, I'm measuring how aggressive are you in your negotiation, and do you get what you want? And you know what? In America, if you're more aggressive, you get more of what you want.
Okay.
And in China, fascinating. In China, if you're more aggressive, you don't get what you want because people don't like it and they push back. Isn't that fascinating?
I see what you mean now.
So I have to say, my chin almost fell on my chest, and I asked him, that's really interesting. Do you notice that there is some connection between that research and why I'm here and what we are just talking about? And he literally
suddenly the penny dropped.
Started, and he went like this, and he looked at me sheepishly, and he said, "Oh, Well, maybe sometimes we don't really connect our research to to what we do. And the whole thing dropped, and and the whole thing went
Fantastic.
away. And I think it's an example how you do a piece of professional work, but you keep it in a box, and you don't even conceptualize this research work as having an impact on your life and the life of others. You keep it in a box, and I think that's very disappointing, because you are that means you're probably designing it wrong with a lower potential than it should have, because this could be very important, and you should talk about it and you should apply it to yourself. So you're limiting probably the width of what it could achieve, and you're limiting the application of it because you keep it in a box, and it's very disappointing.
A wider range of conversation, but I think the conclusion is very clear. Everyone needs to do research.
I agree.
So whatever job you do, whatever position you have, a thinking process is a research
You need
process.
to ask questions about what's happening around you in order to understand it better. I fully agree.
I think this is the time. I think we might need to bring a fashionable act. Is about let's do research. That's my conclusion. Well,
Okay.
thank you for your time.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.